when 60-year-old Ilene Gowan vanished after her morning shift. Her boyfriend claimed he simply dropped her off at a friend's house. He didn't mention that his friend's house is a frozen ditch. Council Bluffs, Iowa, is a city that sits directly across the river from Omaha, Nebraska, acting as a Midwestern hub where the lives of everyday working people unfold in a predictable, quiet rhythm. But in early 2023, this community became the epicenter of a highly complex investigation that local media and legal circles would come to call the Dead in a Ditch murder trial. At the absolute heart of this tragic narrative was Ilene Gowan, a 60-year-old mother and grandmother who was well known in the local area as a dedicated employee at Sugar's Lounge. Ilene was a woman deeply rooted in her family, a person whose sudden absence would immediately spark intense panic among her children and grandchildren. Yet, behind her public-facing life at the lounge lay a highly turbulent personal dynamic. For an extended period, Ilene had been locked in a volatile, on-and-off relationship with a 62-year-old man named Ivan Samuel, Sam Brammer. Their history was marked by instability and frequent emotional fractures, a repeating cycle of separation and reconciliation that those close to them knew all too well. On February 13, 2023, that volatility crossed a definitive, irreversible line into lethal violence. When Ilene completely vanished on that chilly winter morning, her family immediately knew that something went terribly wrong, as she was not the type of person to simply cut contact and walk away from her life. What began as a desperate missing persons search would rapidly transform into a massive homicide investigation, heavily centering around an intricate digital surveillance reconstruction, a dense timeline of circumstantial evidence, and what would eventually become a critical battle of expert forensic testimonies in a courtroom. This case would ultimately challenge the local authorities to look far beyond the physical evidence alone, forcing them to reconstruct the final hours of a grandmother's life through the lens of a modern, digital dragnet. The town of Council Bluffs could only watch in shock as the details began to leak out, revealing a story of immense betrayal where a long-term partner allegedly transformed into a calculated predator. As I guide you through this, we will uncover how detectives managed to track a single vehicle across state lines, decode a stomach-churning sequence of fast food drive-through footage, and leverage a groundbreaking forensic discovery to unmask a killer who believed he had left no traces behind. The investigation into the disappearance of Ilene Gowan truly took shape when local detectives turned their full attention away from standard search methods and began utilizing a comprehensive digital surveillance reconstruction. In the modern era, our movements are tracked by an invisible grid of technology, and on the morning of February 13, 2023, that grid captured a definitive chronological sequence of events. At exactly 8:32 a.m., an extensive network of municipal traffic cameras and private commercial surveillance systems throughout Council Bluffs captured Ivan Samuel Sam Brammer operating his personal vehicle, a distinct Ford F-150 truck. The video feeds recorded Brammer pulling up to Sugar's Diner, a local establishment deeply tied to Ilene's daily life, where he picked up the 60-year-old grandmother. At this specific timestamp, Ilene was demonstrably alive and well, voluntarily stepping into the passenger cabin of her on-and-off boyfriend's truck. To anyone watching the street that morning, it looked like an entirely routine interaction between two familiar people embarking on a morning drive. However, investigators pulling these video logs, frame by frame, would soon realize that this 8:32 a.m. footage was the absolute last time Ilene Gowan would ever be seen alive by the public. The surveillance tracking continued as Brammer's Ford F-150 navigated through the city streets, eventually heading toward the state border. At 9:28 a.m., the truck was captured by a camera heading westbound, driving directly toward the city of Omaha, Nebraska. Up to this precise minute, the vehicle's path was linear, clear, and perfectly recorded. But immediately following that 9:28 a.m. sighting, the digital trail suddenly hit an absolute wall. An hour-long gap in surveillance footage followed. For exactly 60 minutes, between 9:28 a.m. and 10:28 a.m., Sam Brammer's Ford F-150 completely vanished from the sight of any public or commercial camera systems. It was within this dark, unrecorded hour that the prosecution would later argue the entire trajectory of Eileen's life was violently and brutally cut short by the man sitting next to her. The defense would later attempt to dismiss the importance of this missing hour. But the physical state of the passenger cabin when the truck finally re-emerged into the public eye would paint a picture so disturbing that it would alter the entire course of the trial. When the clock struck 10:28 a.m. on that fateful Monday morning, exactly 1 hour after the Ford F-150 had completely disappeared from the westbound camera feeds heading toward Omaha, the vehicle suddenly re-entered the grid. A surveillance camera caught the truck re-emerging on the road. But as detectives in the video analysis room leaned in to closely inspect the newly recovered footage, a profound sense of horror began to settle over the entire active investigation team. There was a radical, terrifying shift in Ilene Gowan's physical posture inside the passenger seat. When she had entered the truck at 8:32 a.m., she was upright, alert, and moving naturally. Now, exactly 2 hours later, she was awkwardly slumped over, leaning strangely against the interior of the cabin, and remaining completely and totally motionless. The visual contrast between her vibrant energy earlier that morning and her current state was completely undeniable. Detectives began tracing the truck's movements frame by frame as it passed successive cameras, zooming in on the passenger window to analyze the figure inside. As the heavy Ford F-150 bounced over uneven patches of pavement, turned sharp corners, and accelerated down the highway, the woman in the passenger seat did not exhibit an inch of independent movement or voluntary muscle control. She did not adjust her head. She did not raise her hands, and she did not look out the window at the passing landscape. She was completely inert, slumped like an object rather than a living person. This highly specific piece of digital surveillance reconstruction provided the state with an unshakable circumstantial foundation proving that the 60-minute gap in camera coverage was the exact window where the volatile relationship between Brammer and Gowan reached its final, fatal intersection. The prosecution would later argue before a jury that the motionless passenger in that truck was no longer a conscious woman going on a drive with her boyfriend. She was already a deceased victim of a homicide, being carted through public streets while her killer calmly steered the vehicle. What followed next in the reconstructed timeline is arguably the most depraved and chilling aspect of the entire case. A specific sequence of events that left a permanent impression on everyone who attended the trial. At 10:56 a.m., Ivan Samuel Sam Brammer decided to steer his Ford F-150 truck into the lane of a local Burger King drive-thru. Consider the sheer psychological detachment required to execute such an action. He had a deceased or dying woman sitting right next to him in the front seat, yet he chose to pull into a commercial fast food lane to interact with restaurant staff. As the truck idled in the drive-thru lane, the restaurant's commercial surveillance cameras captured the interior of the vehicle with crisp clarity. The footage explicitly showed Ilene Gowan remaining in what detectives formally described as a very awkwardly stiff position, failing to move a single fraction of an inch throughout the entire duration of the transaction. She was completely rigid, her body locked in place. A chilling visual representation of a person experiencing the immediate physical aftermath of a violent assault. Brammer placed his order and paid for his food at the window as if it were an entirely ordinary afternoon, completely unfazed by the stiff, lifeless body sitting mere inches away from his right shoulder. The truck then exited the fast food parking lot and continued down the road. Just 10 minutes later, at 11:06 a.m., another surveillance camera caught the Ford F-150 further along its route. But in this new clip, the visual evidence shifted in a radical way. The passenger seat was now completely and totally empty. Within that narrow 10-minute window between 10:56 a.m. and 11:06 a.m., the rigid figure that had been slumped in the truck had completely vanished from the vehicle. The prosecution leveraged this precise digital timeline to argue that Brommer used this exact 10-minute window to dump Eileen's body in a remote, unmonitored area away from the main thoroughfares. The empty seat at 11:06 a.m. stood as definitive proof that the trip to Burger King wasn't just a casual lunch stop. It was a calculated interlude in the systematic disposal of a human body. While Sam Brommer was continuing with his day, Eileen's family was rapidly coming to the realization that something was terribly wrong at home. By February 15, 2023, 2 full days after she had initially stepped into that Ford F-150, Eileen was officially reported missing by her daughter. As her loved ones frantically searched her residence for clues or indications of where she might have gone, they immediately noticed that a highly significant personal item had vanished from her home. Eileen kept a personal, small black safe inside her residence, an item known to contain roughly $1,200 in cash. That safe was completely gone from its usual spot. For nearly 2 weeks, an agonizing silence hung over Council Bluffs and the broader regions of Pottawatomie County as law enforcement officers and community volunteers searched for the 60-year-old grandmother. The definitive, tragic answer finally came on February 26, 2023, in a deeply rural landscape near the small town of Traynor, Iowa. A hunter and his grandfather were walking through the area when they happened to scan a deep roadside ditch. There, partially buried under the winter elements and hidden alongside piles of common roadside trash, they discovered a human body. It was Ilene Gowan. She had been dumped face down in the freezing snow, left out in the cold like a piece of garbage. When the forensic crime scene teams arrived to process the ditch, they confirmed that her personal purse was entirely missing, and the small black safe from her house was nowhere to be found near the scene. The discovery site near Traynor painted a vivid picture of the absolute coldness of the perpetrator, who had thrown a grandmother's body into a common ditch alongside trash. It was a horrific end to a 2-week search, shifting the community's collective focus from a missing persons case to a full-scale demand for justice against her volatile on-and-off boyfriend. With Eileen's body finally recovered from the snow-covered ditch near Traynor, the focus of the state's investigation shifted directly to the medical examiner's office. However, the prosecution was about to hit a massive, incredibly complicated forensic wall due to the condition of the remains. When the state associate medical examiner conducted the initial autopsy, the physical documentation of trauma was undeniably extensive. The examiner recorded more than 33 separate lacerations, contusions, and abrasions, cross-cutting Gowan's scalp, her face, her torso, and her limbs. Additionally, the clinical examination revealed that she had suffered multiple fractured teeth, an ironclad biological indicator of a severe blunt force physical struggle prior to her death. But despite this clear evidence of external physical violence, the environmental conditions created an insurmountable medical obstacle for the initial examiner. Because Eileen's body had been left face down in a rural ditch for 11 days, exposed to sub-freezing winter temperatures, and undergoing advanced decomposition before being found partially frozen, the state associate medical examiner could not definitively isolate the exact internal biological mechanism that caused her life to end. Consequently, the initial official autopsy report designated both the exact cause of death and the manner of death as completely undetermined. This was a potentially catastrophic blow to the state's legal case. In a murder trial, if the medical examiner cannot state with absolute certainty that a homicide occurred and exactly how it occurred, a defense team can easily argue that the victim died of natural causes, exposure to the cold, or an accidental fall. This left the prosecution with a massive mountain of circumstantial surveillance data, but a lack of definitive medical proof of a killing. The state had to find a way to break through this forensic wall if they had any hope of holding Sam Brammer legally accountable. Refusing to let the undetermined medical ruling stall the pursuit of justice, Ilene Gowan's family and the Pottawatomie County prosecution took a highly decisive step. They brought in one of the most famous, respected, and experienced forensic pathologists in the entire world, Dr. Michael Baden, to conduct a comprehensive independent review of the autopsy data. Dr. Baden approached the file with a fresh set of expert eyes, looking past the advanced decomposition and the freezing artifacts that had severely complicated the initial examination. It didn't take long for his deep expertise to uncover a critical, historic piece of forensic evidence that had been entirely overlooked during the initial post-mortem processing. On the skin of Ilene's neck, Dr. Baden identified a highly distinctive, compressed zipper imprint that had been left behind in the flesh. This structural compression pattern was an exact mechanical match to the design of a zipper slider and teeth. Armed with this physical discovery, Dr. Baden took the witness stand during the trial and delivered a powerful piece of medical testimony. He testified with absolute medical certainty that Ilene Gowan did not die of natural causes or simple exposure to the winter weather. Rather, she died of traumatic asphyxia due to acute neck compression. In plain terms, she had been strangled to death. Dr. Baden explained the violent mechanics of the murder to the jury, concluding that her killer had forcefully grabbed the collar of her very own zippered jacket and used it as a tool of lethal strangulation, twisting and pulling the fabric directly against her throat during a desperate, violent struggle for survival. This expert revelation shattered the defense's arguments and provided the prosecution with the exact medical cause of death they needed, linking her 33 external injuries directly to an intentional act of strangulation committed inside that Ford F-150 truck. While the forensic medical experts were battling over the zipper imprints, detectives were actively working the financial trail left behind by the missing black safe. Following the disappearance and murder of Ilene, Ivan Samuel Sam Brammer was noticed by those around him to have a sudden, unexplained influx of a significant amount of cash in his possession. When investigators openly questioned him about where this money had suddenly come from, Brammer concocted a specific financial alibi. He claimed that he had earned the cash completely legitimately by selling various mechanical tools on the Facebook Marketplace platform. It seemed like a convenient story, but the prosecution was about to deliver one of the most dramatic courtroom moments of the entire trial. The state called Brammer's very own son to the witness stand to testify under oath. In front of the jury, the son effectively and completely dismantled his father's financial alibi. He testified that he was the person who actually managed his father's tool storage facilities and physical inventory, and he stated with absolute certainty that no such Facebook Marketplace tool sales had ever occurred during that time period. This devastating familial testimony stripped away Brammer's lies, leaving his defense completely exposed. Faced with the undeniable reality of his son's words on the stand, Brammer later had to admit the truth to investigators. The sudden influx of cash in his pockets had come directly from Ilene Gowan's missing small black safe. This critical admission tied him directly to the theft of her property and established a powerful, greedy secondary motive for his actions on the morning of February 13. It showed that he didn't just dump her body like trash, but he had actively plundered her home for quick financial gain. Beyond the surveillance timelines, the compressed zipper imprints, and the stolen safe money, Sam Brammer's own frantic behavior provided the court with powerful evidence of what the legal system refers to as consciousness of guilt. Days after a routine welfare check was conducted and the body was recovered, law enforcement officers attempted to approach Brammer in person to follow up on the rapidly developing homicide investigation. A completely innocent man would have stopped to talk to the police to help find out who had killed his on and off girlfriend. But Brammer did the exact opposite. The moment he saw law enforcement vehicles approaching, he experienced an immediate wave of panic and chose to flee. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal of his vehicle, initiating a highly dangerous, high-speed police chase through a quiet residential neighborhood in Council Bluffs. Dashcam and bystander evidence presented during the trial showed Brammer accelerating to speeds exceeding 50 miles per hour, completely disregarding stop signs, pedestrian safety, and basic rules of the road as he desperately tried to shake the pursuing officers. He managed to temporarily elude the immediate pursuit and escape the residential neighborhood grid, but his freedom was incredibly short-lived. Law enforcement flooded the broader area, utilizing coordinated tracking to corner the fleeing suspect, and he was successfully arrested shortly after his high-speed flight. This dangerous chase through a residential zone was highlighted by prosecutors to the jury as a clear sign of a man who knew his digital and financial lives were completely collapsing around him, and who would risk public safety to escape a murder conviction. The legal reckoning for Ivan Samuel, Sam Brammer, arrived in November 2023 inside a packed Pottawatomie County courtroom, following a highly publicized trial that captivated the entire state of Iowa. The jury retired to deliberate on the mountain of circumstantial surveillance data, financial thefts, and the expert medical path cleared by Dr. Michael Baden. The verdict was swift and unanimous. Sam Brammer was found guilty on all counts, including second-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and second-degree theft. On January 18, 2024, the judicial system delivered its final maximum penalty. The judge sentenced Brammer to a total of 65 years in state prison, combining a 50-year sentence for the murder charge consecutively with the maximum terms for the theft and corpse abuse charges to ensure he would likely never breathe free air again. Brammer refused to accept his fate, launching a formal legal appeal that challenged his convictions. He argued that there had been prosecutorial misconduct during closing arguments, claimed the jury instructions regarding territorial jurisdiction between Iowa and Nebraska were faulty, and asserted that the judge had misused judicial discretion by forcing his sentences to run consecutively. However, on January 9, 2025, the Court of Appeals of Iowa thoroughly and completely rejected every single one of his legal claims, formally affirming all of his original criminal convictions. Now, as we stand here in 2026, Ivan Sam Brammer remains completely incarcerated within the heavy walls of the Iowa Department of Corrections, serving out the remainder of his 65-year sentence. The Dead in a Ditch trial came to a final close, proving that no matter how remote the ditch or how dark the surveillance gap, the forensic truth will always find a way to come to light. If you found this deep dive into the legal and psychological layers of this case meaningful, please subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot. Don't forget to hit the like button if you appreciate the effort that goes into uncovering these real-life cases. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and I'll see you in the next video.